Hello and welcome to episode 58 of It's Never Sunny in Seattle, a Seattle Mariners podcast. I'm your host today, Evan James, joined by the full crew. We got Mikey Ahedo and Anders Jorstad with us. It's always exciting to talk after a win. The Mariners squeezed one out last night. Mitch Haniger with was that a double? Is that what it was? In the 10th inning to score Dylan Moore.
A single.
Yeah, I think they ruled that as a single, even if it would have been a double, because that's when the run scored, basically, I think.
And I don't think that throw counts as an error either. I'm pretty sure that they just count that as an RBI and a single, but it wasn't a great play at the plate. Either way, Mariners win another close game against the Cleveland Guardians. That's the first two of the 3-game series, or the 4-game series, because they're playing tomorrow as well. And the team has played about 500 since the All-Star break, kind of been stuck a little bit in neutral, but there have been some bright spots. And obviously we're here today to discuss the big news, the biggest news. John said on the other podcast, maybe the biggest Mariners news day since Ken Griffey Jr., or really since the Felix contract signing, I believe was the last kind of event that felt this way. But I'll kick it over to you first, Mikey. This is a really unique contract in terms of the different ways that it can play out over time. What do you think is most interesting about the possible futures that have been laid out with the Mariners and Julio?
Oh God. I mean, I think the main thing is that there's not really a way that this can go poorly for the Mariners, which I don't love for Julio. But the other thing is that, even if, and I think we talked about this a fair amount in the Discord, even if, I don't know, Julio is also protected. He's got, his own player options, and I am fairly confident that he'll meet a lot of these these escalators, a lot of these incentives, but they are very it's MVP and a lot of these voting things. I think in other ways, it's kind of difficult. So it's such a weird precedent to set for these contracts, because I think, yesterday made me think a lot about labor and a lot about, the relations between owners / teams and players. And I don't know. I still don't quite know how to feel about this contract. I still feel like I need to process it, but because it is exploitative. It's just how much is it? Because really, all of this is not just Julio.
Yes.
So
any major league contract is exploitative to one degree or another.
Right.
It's a matter of what this is.
I mean, you think about it in the grand scheme of labor. If you worked an office job, it would be pretty ridiculous if your office forced you to work there for 10 years, let alone 18 years.
That would be pretty weird. I'm locked up for a year at my job, and I already want to leave. So, to an extent, at least, pay me. But yeah, I mean, Dan Szymborski wrote up, kind of the just kind of the analysis of the trade, and Zips really loves Julio. I don't know what the total is.
That's one thing me and Zips have in common.
Agreed.
For the record, for those who are listening, I thought it was really interesting. His first projected below average season is 2039, which is a long time from now.
Really?
Yeah. Yep.
Conveniently,
I guess,
that is the absolute end of the contract.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The first time that he supposedly will have an OPS below 100, OPS plus below 100 is 2037, in which, Jesus fucking Christ, I will be.
Don't
42.
Think about it.
Yeah, it's no good. But yeah, man, Zip thinks he's going to be a perennial all-star. I think we'll probably win an MVP at some point, between now and 2030. And yeah, I don't know. It's just such a weird contract that I still don't completely know. I don't completely know all of the different. It's like fucking Bandersnatch. But Yeah, I guess my point was that it's a very weird precedent to set, which obviously this isn't the first of its kind, to take baseball, which, what's the word, guarantees contracts and makes them not. And I think that's what teams are trying to move towards to, not lose out as much.
Would you like me to break down the contract?
I think that'd be lovely for everyone.
So basically the contract, because it's extraordinarily complicated, but it starts out with Julio getting an 8-year, $120 million deal. That is like the base of the contract. That's like the guaranteed, no matter what, he's going to make that. And they are paying him. This is one of the 8 years, basically. So he got paid $15 million for this year. He gets paid $15 million for every single year through 2029. Then at the end of 2028, they have to decide. So before his like contract year, they have to decide whether to pick up a 10-year option, the value of which will vary depending on how he finishes in MVP voting, which is something that you had just alluded to, like the awards of it all. So I think it could range anywhere from 200 million to 350 million. And if the Mariners said no to that, then Julio could pick up a 5-year, $90 million contract option on his side of things. And if he says no, then he becomes a free agent after the 8th year. So it could be 8 years. It could be 13 if Julio picks up his end of the option if the Mariners decline. Or it could be 18 years as well. I believe it could actually also be 16 because that 10-year option could also be an 8-year option if he's not like performing well in MVP voting. So yeah, it's a very, very weird structure that basically guarantees Julio will be underpaid throughout his whole career, even if he's like a perennial MVP. Because if he wins like 3 MVPs in these first 8 years of his contract, then what's going to happen is he's going to make $35 million annually, which already is pretty low for a guy who's like as good as he could be. Because Juan Soto just said no to $40 million a year. So it's, people were talking about how, this maxes out at $470 million over 18 years. And that is the most, that could be the biggest contract in American sports history. Yes. But that certainly will not be the case by the time he makes that money. And by the time that deal is over, due to inflation and all sorts of other factors, that contract will be probably pretty run-of-the-mill in terms of annual value. So, it's great now, and I think it's great for him to secure that money. I'm sorry, my cat is like trying to get in the middle of the video if you're watching on the video feed. It's great for him to get all that money. And it's super exciting for him. I know that this is something that he's looked forward to. But as Mikey said, it is exploitative in that sense. At the same time, like, this is probably the most flexible contract that has ever been signed in this degree. Like, Julio still has a very much a incentive to perform because he can get paid exponentially more money if he wins MVPs and he wins Silver Sluggers and he wins Gold Gloves. So I think that's cool for him is like because Julio loves motivators, and this could be a motivator for him to be like, I want that option to be a 10-year option instead of an 8-year option, or I want to make the 350 million instead of 200 million, So I think, Mikey, what you were saying, like, there's no way this contract is bad for Seattle. I think that's pretty much true. I mean, obviously injuries, but even then, like, they're only losing $15 million a year, and then they would just turn down the option.
Which is like nothing. That's like what you pay. Again, like I brought up this example way back when, but that's what the Mariners were paying Mike Leake is like 16, or at least that's what his contract was. I don't remember, The other thing is that, so 15 million a year for 8 years, which is pretty, like, I think something that we need to remember, I guess, to have full context is that Julio was under team control for how many years?
He would have been quite a few. I think so. He's a rookie this year. He would have had 6. So he would have been a free agent in 2027, I think.
Well, I think what I was saying just now is, I think the thing that we have to remember is, he had 7-ish years of team control. Several of those years, like 4-ish, I'm trying to look on Spotrac, but after players sign contracts, I don't think you can go back and look at previous contracts without having a premium membership, which I'm never going to do. But he had 4 years of team control in which he's going to get paid shit, and then he would have had 3 years maybe of arbitration, which he would have got paid less shit. Not what he deserves, but more, probably somewhere around, probably more than that 15 million figure. So I think part of what makes this, I guess, ideal for both sides is the Mariners get to front load some of that money that they're paying him in the front of the contract in a way that is not, it's not cost prohibitive for them. They can,
I think that's like the key to this contract is like they're giving him money early that he wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah.
And by doing so, they're showing goodwill by doing that. And so in exchange, he shows goodwill by signing a more team friendly rest of the deal.
Right. So, and then for Julio, it's, instead of making, a couple million in the first several years, you cash out on 60 million over 4 years. So I think, if I'm Julio, I sign this easily. But him signing it does not make it not exploitative, I guess.
I think we're in agreement that like in general player contracts are very exploitative, but I think that this is like not as exploitative as a lot of deals that we have seen, especially recently, right? Like this is not as bad as anything that Atlanta has done, basically. But I think that he has an opportunity to really get paid here. To me, you can think of this, and I think Evan, you broke this down on the Look at Lending podcast, is like 2 deals in one, right? So the first half of this deal is basically like his pre-free agency years, because I think that they're only buying out 2 years of free agency in that first, the base contract of the 8 years. So essentially, they're paying him $15 million a year throughout his rookie pay, throughout his arbitration, and throughout his first 2 years of free agency. And then they're basically saying, depending on how you do, we'll up the value of this free agent contract that we would sign at the end of it, which is this $8 to $10 million option. So like they're basically guaranteeing you're going to get a bigger payday later, and how big that payday is depends on how well you play, but you're going to sign it with us. So it's basically like we will sign you a big free agent deal. It's just a matter of like how good is that deal going to be. But it's definitely not going to be, like we said before, it's not going to be worth as much as it would in the open market. So
also, he's definitely going to get 4 top 10 votes, because that's just between 2022 and 2029. That to me, I mean, so that immediately bumps him up from 8 years 200 to 8 years 260. So I think the second half of the contract, and I'm just going to pull out my fucking calculator because math is real hard.
This is the analyst that
he's gonna make $32.5 million. That's like it's not that great.
It's not great, but it's not like terrible.
I think even if he gets 2 MVP wins, which it's hard to win an MVP, and 4 top 5 votes, 10 years, $350 million is not great for the player that Julio is or could be. It's worth thinking about that. Julio's prime is in these 8 years. Like I've talked about this plenty of times, but the prime is not like 28 to 32 or whatever people think it is. I think Eno has talked about, like the research saying players are pretty much ready once they're in the league. And like Zimborski's projections pretty much express that like his peak is 2025 and 2026 when he is essentially a 6-WAR player. After that, after 2026, he starts trending down. Like not Felix trending down, but he starts trending down as a player at starting in his 26 age season. So yeah, I guess I don't know. It is worth thinking about that. Like, again, to be fair, to give full context, but I think, and based on inflation, because in 8 years, this is going to be very different. Like this contract is going to feel very different. So
we might be signing relievers to $35 million deals by then.
fucking, well, I was going to say, I hope not. I hope so, but also I hope, yeah. I hope teams are not the worst about it. So yeah, end of the day, I think really happy for Julio. Like I think this is a bigger deal to me than Felix. I think Felix was a really big deal at the time, but I think at the end of the day, at the end of, when it's all said and done, I think Julio is going to mean just as much, if not more, which is like weird to like compare. It feels so quantitative, but I think Julio is going to end up meaning a lot to the city because I think he's going to be associated with playoffs and with hopefully a championship. So happy for him, happy for the Mariners. This is a fucked system, that we're existing under, but at the end of the day, I think this is a good thing.
Yeah. It's super interesting. The Mariners have a penchant for these super creative contracts. I'm thinking about 2 in particular. I don't know if you guys remember the Felix deal, but one clause in the Felix contract that was super weird was that if he missed, I think it was if he missed a full season due to an arm injury,
Tommy John specifically, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Right. During any point of that contract, the Mariners would have, at the end of the contract, a $1 million option to keep him on, which is just unheard of.
Ironically, they probably wouldn't have actually taken that option.
No,
even if they just given the way it all went, they wouldn't have taken it for $1 million, which is wild. One thing I wanted to say is that a difference between what we've been talking about here is where Julio is as a player. When Felix signed, he had been in the league for a while, right? He played most of his rookie contract and was already a dominant force, had already been not a Cy Young winner yet, but like on the fringes of that conversation for the elite best pitchers in the American League. Julio is 21 and a rookie. And that is different when we consider kind of like what the Mariners have done. Because, I explained on the other podcast yesterday, a big reason that teams don't do this is because they're trying to milk all that excess value out of players who are basically free, right? Like there are other teams in this league, and I won't say who they are, but they're there, who would have been more than happy to have Julio play out the next 6-7 years for free, right? And I'm not gonna anger anyone. I anger everyone on the last podcast. I'm just not gonna do any call outs by name this time. By the way, apologies to anyone who feels that I slandered Tacoma. Tacoma's fine. I have love for Tacoma. I have no ill will towards Tacoma. So sorry.
Yeah, you're what the blue collar music or whatever.
Yeah, one of our Discord users got a little upset at Evan for slandering Tacoma.
It was poor word choice, but I was parroting back something Matthew said, so that's why it was like that. But
I don't know.
I don't love the word choice either.
Yeah.
But anyways, but in terms of Julio, the Mariners signing him now means that they're not doing that. They're not just milking him for free for now. They're giving him $15 million on the first day. Essentially, they're giving him $15 million a year going forward. Is that pennies in baseball? Absolutely. Like, it's not like he's breaking anybody's bank. This is absolutely a team friendly thing. I also do want to point out that in terms of risk, a lot of people have compared, what Julio is and who he's going to be for this city to Ken Griffey Jr. Ken Griffey Jr. didn't sign his big contract here. He signed it in Cincinnati. but it didn't really work out. Like the general perception of him in Cincinnati is that that was a bad deal, that didn't work out for them, that he wasn't super happy there. There are versions of this, and when we kind of extrapolate and we're looking out and we're looking at the, the fan graphs, statistics projecting him, what his batting average is going to be or whatever, what his value is going to be, we're really just guessing, right? We don't know. All we really know is who he is today. And I absolutely hope Julio is a 10 win player and is better than Aaron Judge, and that we're sitting here thinking he is underpaid at $35 million a year. That would be sick, right? Like I'd like to have that discussion, but I also understand intellectually that he's a knee injury away from being a different player in terms of archetype. And we saw this. We saw the Mariners' other best prospect is probably Kyle Lewis, and we just saw his career get derailed for a pretty simple injury, and obviously I don't wish any of that, but I recognize that this deal I think is okay for where the team is at. I think that the first chunk of it, the first 8 years, are substantially more exploitative, as it were, than the second half, because the second half he's obviously getting paid like 3 times as much. But this is okay for where we are. I'd always like the players to get more money, but if this is like a starting block for Julio and for the Mariners putting a foundation down, pretty good, right? Like it could be better for him, it could be worse for the Mariners, but this is what it is. And
I do want to address the question, because my dad texted me asking. Because he's not like plugged into Twitter or anything, and he's like, "Why did the Mariners do this? Like, what's the purpose of doing this?" And to anyone who I think this is a question a lot of people are going to have. So to answer that question, the reason the Mariners do this is to avoid basically what has happened with Aaron Judge in New York and with Juan Soto in Washington, which is you just like keep kicking that can down the road and you piss off the player. Because basically what you're saying is, I am not making you a priority. And that is especially true when both of those franchises go out and they sign big deals for other players. So, the Nationals signed Patrick Corbin to a big deal. They signed Steven Strasburg to a big deal. The Yankees, obviously, every other offseason, they're making the biggest acquisition in baseball, and they're not locking up Aaron Judge. So when you do things like that, you're telling the player, you are not my priority. And the player says, all right, I'm going to raise my asking price now, because now I want to prove you wrong. And I want to make it players, they have a chip on their shoulder, and rightfully so. And I think Julio, as we've seen demonstrated, is a player who has a chip on his shoulder. And right now that is in service of the Mariners and of Seattle, but you don't want that to be in the other direction, right? You don't want it to be where you turn it against the GM, because we've seen that happen in Seattle too, where Kyle Seager resented the Mariners. And I think the Mariners also know, this is also, it's not just player to GM, this is a public display. People know what contracts are being signed for. And this is very much a signal to both free agents, prospective free agents, and other players in the league, as well as the city of Seattle. Like, we are serious about this, and we care about our homegrown stars. Like, we care about our players. We care about winning. And that's what this contract signals. So it kind of covers all those bases in one. And because of how complex this contract is, you have to think they've been talking about this pretty much all year, right? And I think the timing of it is certainly purposeful, where they signed it the morning of Ichiro weekend beginning, because it's kind of a signal of past legend and future legend. They want to celebrate both things in one. And while it sucks for Ichiro to have to like share the stage, so to speak, I think it's a really cool gesture for the whole city to get to celebrate this weekend against, one of the most, I guess, close opponents in their wild card race, although not exactly, because they're leading the AL Central, but they could be. So overall, I think it's, I think that's why you do this deal for the Mariners.
They're also like pals, I don't know.
Right.
I didn't read the article, but I do know that they have something of a relationship. Also, I'm seeing something pretty interesting. Maybe this is a good segue. Although I do want to note before we end on Julio, that Szymborski's article says that Zips projects that Julio only would have made $52 million through his salary arbitration years rather than the $218 million his projected performance would be estimated to net him in free agency. I feel like that's a really important number, $218 million, because I'm trying to think, because he's not going to make that still, So I think that's the other reason, is that, yeah, you don't have to piss off the player, and also you don't have to pay what he's worth, which is obviously an extreme bummer. So yeah, just felt like I wanted to end on that. Evan, how do you feel about moving on to talking about Logan Gilbert?
Yeah, let's do some pitching. I think that we've covered the Julio contract pretty extensively, and I think that Gilbert is one of the interesting topics of the second half of the season so far, just because he was so dynamite the first couple months of the season. His performance has seemingly tailed off a little bit. And to those of us layman's kind of watching, it appears that he's regressed a little bit to kind of his last year's tactics of throwing the fastball and not relying on the secondaries as much. But obviously, you are the pitching guru. You were there last night to see him have one of his better outings in a while. But, as you were pointing out on Twitter, not really getting the swinging strikes that we want to see from him. So what do you think he needs to do to get back on track, or is he on track?
Yeah, we talked a little bit pre-show about like what like a little bit just about the situation, like what certain people think is kind of going on. I didn't see this, but says it's pretty clear that it is some sort of fatigue. I would say that some of this is in line with that. Like his velo is not gone. If you want to argue that the command has waned, I think maybe you could make that argument. I think that's probably true. I think it's pretty troubling that he's at his seasonal velocity, which is 96, and he sat 96.1 last night. He got one whiff on 46 fastballs, and 24 of those were swings. So 24 times a hitter swung at Gilbert's fastball, and they only swung through it once.
I will say Cleveland is like the most contact heavy team in baseball, though. So
yeah,
there's that to consider.
Definitely fair. But there's also that this has been an issue for a little bit. I'll pull up his whiff numbers. So, I mean, you can see that he's trying to adjust, and we've talked about, he has a little bit, reverted into, I guess, the Logan of old at times, where he really leans on that fastball. But also, like, he's throwing more curveballs than literally he's ever thrown. He's starting to, like, last night he threw the changeup a lot. He threw it 22% of the time. That might be, I'll look it up. That might be a career high. This looks like easily. Oh no, he threw 21%. Yeah, this is a career high. So that's notable. Like, you want to see him mixing in other offerings, so that the curveball usage is trending up, the slider usage is kind of trending down, especially in these past two games. Because I mean, Eno likes a slider because he can command the slider. I don't like it really. Like, it is what it is, but maybe that's why his fastball has played down too, because it's not like tunneling as well with other pitches. I don't know, but the whiffs going down, and yeah, you're right, it is mostly like that game last night was the worst swing and miss game his fastball's ever had. It's been trending down, I would say, since late a month. So, which is also, interesting timing, because that's how long his pitch mix has been kind of changing. Yeah, what do you do from here? I mean, it is a thing where you throw fewer fastballs. That's easier said than done because his other offerings haven't been good. I wish I had Eno to do the breaking news thing. It's not really breaking news, but he did throw 5 sinkers last night, which is really interesting to me. Because I've been wanting him to do something like that for a while now. He throws a lot more strikes with his curveball than he does his slider. His slider, and I think it's important to look at ball percentage or strike percentage rather than CSW. He throws like 40% balls with his slider, which is not good. And it's like 34% with his curveball. So I feel like it is a judicious change to move towards his curveball. His changeup, he throws a fuck ton of balls with. So I think 4-seam sinker curveball, moving towards more of that could do it if he's keeping the velo. And theoretically it helps turn that 24% foul percentage and 12% whiff percentage into more like, I don't know, 14% whiffs and 22% fouls. But yeah, really the takeaway here is he's moving towards one of his better pitches. His fastball is not playing like it was, and now he ostensibly has a sinker. And like based on the movement profile, it's definitely a sinker. It comes in like a tick below his fastball, maybe 2, and is in between the changeup and 4-seamer in terms of horizontal movement and short form movement or movement without gravity. So that is interesting to me. I've been writing a fuck ton about sinkers lately, and the Mariners seem to really fucking love it. It's not sexy, but it does get hitters off your fastball. So, yeah, that's a good thing to me. And he's doing that against righties, which is important because he's not struggling against lefties as much. Last thing, because this is a fucking monologue, that I wanted to say is if you look at his strikeout minus walk percentage over the months, it's really gone from like a phase of being like, I don't know, let's say 18-ish, which is pretty good, to like 16, 17-ish over the next couple months, which is like still pretty solid, but not like amazing, to 5% in August, which is not good. His K percentage in August is 12.4%. Not good at all. I would say bad. And 7.4% walk percentage, which is like fine. But he's really lost his ability to strike out hitters. And this has been in decline since sometime in June. So, yeah, you got to do something. And I think the sinker might help. But it's hard. It's hard to adjust on the move. So that is all I have to say. I've been talking for way too long. I'm for those who don't know, I'm a therapist. And sometimes in sessions, like, because I let clients talk for so long, like I'll let them talk for like 10 minutes. I have a lot of things that I just like kind of build up. And then I'm like, okay, let's go line by line. And like, this is, this is what I'm going to say. And I talk for several minutes and then I'll be like, okay, I'm not supposed to do that. So, yeah.
That's a good thing you host a podcast, Mikey.
I guess so. I think it makes it worse. But yeah, Gilbert could use something that is different.
So the note I would give on Gilbert and really on the starters in general has nothing to do with Gilbert. It's that I was listening to George Kirby did 2 interviews this week. He did one after he threw the 24 straight strikes, which is lit, by the way. We'll do a little shout out to George Kirby for setting the major league record for strikes thrown to start a game. That's incredibly cool. Also goes to our point that he definitely intentionally pegged that hitter because George Kirby does not throw balls. That's not his MO. So yeah. But George was interviewed this week, and they were talking to him a little bit about pitch mix, but they were commenting on whether or not he was going to be on a pitch count, whether or not he's on an innings limit, how they're going to shut him down potentially and kind of monitor that. And both the Mariners and him basically said, we have more metrics to look at fatigue and to gauge that kind of thing than just pitch counts and inning numbers. And that's how we look at stuff as fans. You know, we say, oh, he threw X number of pitches. Oh, he threw, you know, he did X number of innings over last year. And those are real stats, but they're not as meaningful as some of the other stuff that they were mentioning. Jerry said specifically, we look at a release point, which is something that Mikey, you've talked about a lot, which is like, you know, when the release point shifts up or down, and especially down, it tends to mean that there's arm fatigue. He talked about spin rates and velocity, and that they're kind of looking at a holistic view of, yeah, how many innings has the guy thrown, but also like, is this stuff diminishing? And they can tell that way before it starts to get out of control, right? You can see that the spin rate's coming a little bit unglued before the pitcher throws their arm out in an ideal situation. And they've said two things. One is that they are noticing that Gilbert seems to be okay, but they're seeing a little bit of diminished effectiveness, obviously, with the fastball. And they do correlate that a little bit to how much he's thrown year over year. And last year in particular, he quadrupled his innings from the year prior, which is not something that typically happens. It was a result of, you know, the pandemic shortened season and him being at the alternate site and essentially missing an entire year and then coming and pitching a full season after being he threw 30 innings the year prior to that, if that, if you even want to count innings at the alternate site as really counting, which we don't necessarily. So that is a factor here. But as it relates to Kirby, they were saying, you know, like, is he going to get shut down? The short answer is no. And all of the signs relating to his stuff, his pitch mix, and his effectiveness has been really positive. So bringing this back to Gilbert had the year that Kirby is having this year last year. So what does his next year look like? Does he see similar fatigue? I think that's an open question. And, you know, we praised the Mariners last week for not injuring any of these young pitchers. That is a good thing.
Okay, Mikey, I have one final question for you, because we know now the Mariners bullpen gave themselves a nickname, which is Los Bomberos. I want to know, and I just posted in our little private chat all the names of all the Mariners bullpen members. I want you to rank all the bullpen members by how confident you are in each one of them to throw a scoreless inning.
Oh, this is fun. Okay. I like this. Okay, let's go Munoz, Seawald, this is hard. Swanson,
okay,
Brash, Murfee, Festa, Castillo, Flexen, I think.
Okay, just for recap's sake, Mikey has pronounced his Bomberos order is Andres Munoz number 1, Paul Sewald number 2. By the way, sacrilegious that you didn't have Sewald as number 1, but we'll table that. You have Eric Swanson at number 3, which if you had like said that at the beginning of the season would be freaking crazy, right? Matt Brash at 4. Then you have Penn Murfee at 5, Festa at 6, Castillo at 7, Flexen at 8. So you have Castillo as your as the bottom ranked actual reliever, which is pretty crazy. We got a question about Flexen. I don't know if you want to like try to address that in here pretty quickly too, but like what you've been thinking of him as a reliever. Let me pull up the asker of the question so we can actually give like credit to that person. It was Sam Gawkin who wanted to know, what is the optimal use of Flexen out of the bullpen? He's only made 2 relief appearances since being converted, and it feels like a lost roster spot at the moment. And you just ranked him last in your Los Bomberos ranking, so I guess you maybe feel similarly?
Well, I think the thing there is that like the bullpen doesn't have a pitcher who's not a compelling pitcher in some way. And I think the thing about Flexen is that, you know, that's not really the case for him. We've barely seen anything out of him, but it doesn't seem yet like anything has ticked up. At least the last time I checked, and right now I'm just kind of scanning like a couple numbers, but like obviously with like strike percentage or strikeout percentage, it's like okay, like it's been like an inning. Ideally, ideally, what do you want to see out of him? I mean, I think what's maybe come up is that there haven't been that many horrible outings by anyone. I think, like we talked about, the team's been on a pretty good run in terms of starting pitching, even Marco. And so I think ideally he's just your what do you call it? The word that's coming to mind is girth.
Oh dear.
Like length. Whatever. Filler. Like I do think there's a pitcher in there, a reliever in there that can be a pretty interesting-ish 2 or 3 inning option. I don't know that he's been that. Actually, and this is probably important to think about, and I feel like I looked into this already but forgot. Eno talked about, on his podcast, the difference between, average velo and max velo in terms of like, if a pitcher's already at pretty near his max velo, he's probably not going to tick up much. His velo on the year is 91.8. His max velo on the year is 94.93. That to me says that Flexen can probably sit higher. Last year his max velo is 96. 2019 it was 98. So like I think he has it in him. I think he just needs to reach back and throw harder. So yeah, I've been pretty uncompelled thus far with who he's been, but yeah, again, I think there's something in there. Like there's a reason why the Mariners chose him over Marco to go to the bullpen, and I know that sounds
sure, he's being paid less.
That does play into it. So
I will say to answer the question of whether it's a lost roster spot, I certainly don't think so. It's important to have a guy who can be a starter in your bullpen and who can be a decent starter at that, and especially in the playoffs. And I think this is something that mentioned. I don't remember if it was on our podcast or if it was on Rates and Barrels, his own podcast. But if you're getting a bad start from a guy and you can tell a couple innings in that, like, Marco's given up 3 runs in the first 2 innings and you want to make sure that the deficit doesn't get out of hand, well, you don't want to go straight to the bullpen because then you've just turned it into a bullpen game. So if you can put Flexen out there instead and he can cover the last 3 innings of what was supposed to be a 5-inning Marco start, that's really valuable. And that's true for any pitcher who struggles out of the gate. And I think that's going to be an important role for Flexen to play, not only when they're in the playoffs, but also as we approach the playoffs. If the Mariners are close down the stretch and they really need to win a couple of games, and Ray goes out there and Ray's control is all over the place, and you can tell that he's just not really finding the feel for his pitches, you can evacuate him quickly before it gets out of hand. And I think that that's kind of why you have Flexen here right now. And that's not a role you could like hand over to just a bullpen guy that you call up from AAA. Now, that said, I kind of wonder how he will play in tandem with Matt Boyd when he comes up, because he's basically doing the Matt Boyd thing right now.
I forgot about Boyd.
Well, and the difference is Boyd's a lefty, because I just named all of Los Bomberos to you, and none of them is left-handed. So the Mariners kind of need a lefty. It seems kind of untenable at their current situation. So Boyd is going to have to replace someone. And maybe that's just Festa, because he's like the most optionable guy. He's been good, but not otherworldly. But having Boyd and Flexen in the bullpen, then it starts to be a question of, is this a wasted roster spot for Flexen?
Oh, so Boyd sat 91, 92 every year. His max velo is like 94 to 96. So again, he's like more 94, 95 nowadays. I actually think it's a really similar thing. And Boyd, I mean, it's really the case with both of them. Actually, because, yeah, Flexen, I think in terms of like zone adjusted vertical approach angle, they're both like not very good fastball shape. One thing that helps fastball shape is velo. So it's really the kind of the same deal with the same deal with the both of them is they really need velo to be successful. Obviously, we've seen with Matthew Boyd, when he doesn't have velo, he gives up hella home runs. So yeah, that's really interesting. I'm really, really curious what they do there because I don't know. Maybe they just kind of juggle relievers through the rest of the season. I don't know. It really would be a bummer to lose pretty much any of these guys. I do think it's probably Festa. I think you're right. Because he's not like. Well, there's also that I think by strikeout minus walk percentage, he's been pretty fucking filthy. Like by all.
Well,
relievers.
I will say, I can almost like assure that it's going to be Festa because in the most recent episode of The Wheelhouse, Jared Dipoto said that when they sent down Festa earlier this year, it was because he was the guy that had options. So I feel like it's almost certain they're going to do that again if they need to call someone up.
Yeah. So yeah, that is a bummer. Also, do you remember the days, and actually this is just the case for me, maybe it's not you, but I remember when people thought, and I'm included in people, that every time you option someone, you're wasting one of their options.
Well, no, that's going to be I thought that was the new CBA.
Are they moving toward
right?
that?
I thought
I don't
so.
know.
That was
also
see, it's funny because in the midst of all the lockout and discussions, like I never got straight what was discussed and what was actually in the CBA. So
yeah,
that was at minimum discussed, but I don't remember if that was actually nailed down.
Speaking of discussed, and you can interpret that whatever way you want, whichever homonym. Do you know who has not been good in the second half of the season in his last 16.2 innings, which is the most of any reliever?
Penn Murfee?
Yeah. Really,
Oof.
really, really not good.
He's been the one that, like, because the bullpen doesn't give up runs very much, but he's been the one when they have recently, it's been him pretty, I feel like. And Castillo had that blown save earlier, but
he 15.2 K percentage, and he was up there before. He was like, I feel like 35s.
I think
right
now
like
he's just gassed. They have like run him into the ground for no reason, but I feel like he's probably just gassed.
Yeah, I think I would send down Murphy. Yeah, I mean Festa hasn't been great either lately, but that's what I would do. So yeah, I think Boyd's gonna be a nice shot in the arm. We'll see. But yeah. Should I touch on Brash before we go?
Yes.
Okay. So let's see. I did end up writing and publishing that article on Brash. Talked about last week, a lot of the vertical approach angle, horizontal approach angle stuff, and I was pretty interested because after we recorded that, after I continued to look into it, came away feeling a little bit different because Brash has on his breaking stuff has lost a lot of swing and miss. Well, I guess that's not necessarily true, but he hasn't like gained a ton of swing and miss. It's mostly been that his curveball has really turned into like a really nice get me over pitch where like hitters just aren't swinging at it. But essentially, the article's called Matt Brash, now a strike thrower. Pretty obvious what it's about. Since the two time frames, so pre-demotion, post-demotion, or I guess post-promotion, he's moved from a pitcher who couldn't throw strikes with his fastball, so 60.7%, not really a workable number for someone who throws majority fastballs, to 73.7, which is elite. Like that's 91st percentile. And I looked into a little bit more. I think because he has dropped his release point a little bit, he's moved, and this only makes sense if you read my Josh Hader article from the other week. He's basically moved from the current not good Josh Hader fastball in terms of flatness and shape to the old elite Josh Hader. And in the article, another way that I said you could, put that is he's moved from a Hansel Robles fastball to an Andres Munoz or Edwin Diaz fastball. So like pretty good. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to to really like point out Brash has been legit, and I'm staring at the numbers from second half numbers. He's really been, in terms of strikeouts, first of all, Munoz has been insane, 48% strikeouts. He's been easily the second best on the team, and thus the third best reliever. So Brash is a weapon in a way that he was not before he went down. So really, I think what the change is moving towards third base changed, the synthetic shape or like how his raw pitch movement plays, because he's able to use that sweep to really make it sweep coming from the third base side of the rubber. And then also it's dropped his arm slot, which helps his fastball come in flatter. Also added velo. So to all this. So I think I would not want to face Matt Brash right now as a hitter. And that he can go 2 to 3 innings. I think he is really the unsung hero of this bullpen. I think Munoz gets a lot of the press for good reason, because I think he's the best reliever in the bullpen. Seawald is obviously very good, but Brash is the one that I think has the most unique role. Imagine Chris Flexen if he was good. So yeah, that's kind of the TLDR of that article. But yeah, Matt Brash now good, now a strike thrower. Yeah, is there anyone else that we wanted to touch on? No.
Durs,
No?
I wanted to know if you're still interested in Matt Brash starting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. I think they should try it. Especially with the changes that Mikey has just mentioned. I think they should give it another go in spring training, because Matt Brash as a starter would be like elite level stuff. Like if he can keep his control gains, and if he can go 5-6 innings, like that is like, it's basically like what Atlanta did with Spencer Strider, where they're like, this is a really good reliever, well, let's try him in the rotation, and all of a sudden he's like one of the best starters in the National League. It may not be that easy, and like Brash might not be a good starter, but I think you gotta see if he can do it. And if he can't, then okay, fine, he's a reliever for the rest of his life. But he went from a struggling starter to a good reliever. I feel like, trying it one more time isn't going to damage him permanently.
Yeah, I just don't want to bounce him around.
That's why I say just do it one more time, and don't try it like every year.
I think he could do some sort of like 2 to 5 inning starter hybrid role. I don't think he can do conventional starting unless he adds that. His changeup is so good metrically. It's really good. And he does like have 3 pitches, but without the changeup, like he needs something that drops and moves arm side, I feel like, especially against lefties. So yeah, I guess we'll see. But I agree. I think they should give him run in some sort of, capacity in that way. But yeah, probably no whatever starting role. Sounds
It'd
like
be
we're
interesting. Yeah, it would be interesting to see if they used him as an opener. That's not really a thing that it feels like teams are doing anymore, but given his unique skill set and being so dominant and having some length, but also maybe being need to be pulled early, you could put him out there as an opener. Um, yeah, it just doesn't seem like a thing the Mariners have wanted to do this year, but it is an option on the table. But we're going to call it there for today. I apologize, everyone. I've been having minor technical difficulties on my side. My computer's Bluetooth is kind of going bad, and it's been an adventure getting it to work lately. But I'm Evan. You can find me on Twitter at Evan James Audio. You can find Anders at Anders Jorstad. You can find Mikey on Twitter at _Kuya Mikey. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts, wherever it is you stream. Additionally, please support the podcast on Patreon by going to patreon.com/neversunnyinseattle. I'll have that as well as a link to the Discord in the description here on YouTube, on Anchor, wherever it is you're listening. Thanks for listening. Go Mariners. And Julio got paid. Big news, right? Big news.